Salahuddin Part 3, The Sultan in Action. Cairo, Egypt. 2 years since the Crusaders had to retreat from Damietta. It has been a peaceful time, and Salahuddin has used the time to strengthen Egypt. The economy improved, the army grew bigger and stronger. The defenses of major Egyptian cities were rebuilt. Salahuddin even went on the offensive against the Crusaders by sending troops to attack the border regions. Everything was going according to plan. Then suddenly, the Fatimid Caliph in Cairo fell gravely ill. As he had no designated successor, Egypt was up for grabs. After 2 centuries of Fatimid rule, seismic changes were about to take place. Quick action was necessary to prevent the power vacuum in Cairo from undoing all the work of Salahuddin so far. Moreover, Salahuddin was under immense political pressure from Nur-ad-Din and the Caliph in Baghdad to establish Sunni dominance in Egypt. And Salahuddin was the second most powerful person in the country. Who was better suited to become the new king of Egypt? Upon the death of the last Fatimid Caliph al-Adid, Salahuddin had now the opportunity to establish his own dynasty. Thus began the Ayyubid dynasty. This was uncharted territory for Salahuddin. He'd always had big plans, but until now he did not have the complete independence and the unmatched power to work on them. Egypt belongs to Salahuddin now, and he has total control of every aspect of it. And so begins Salahuddin's great leap forward. Immediately upon sitting on the throne, he proclaimed the Caliph in Baghdad as Caliph, and Egypt became part of the Abbasid Caliphate. Salahuddin would be a semi-independent ruler with the title Sultan of Egypt. Salahuddin was still theoretically under Nur-ad-Din's command, and he did not want to damage that relationship. So Salahuddin arranged for a handsome annual tribute for Nur-ad-Din, making sure that he had no opponents from the Muslim side to challenge his power in Egypt. Once the external support was ensured, Salahuddin focused on his own dynastic ambitions. No doubt the dream of freeing the Holy Lands was always burning inside of him, but he understood that he couldn't launch a campaign against the Crusaders unless he established a powerful empire in Egypt first. Salahuddin turned the wheel of change in Egypt. His council revised the tax codes, ensuring further revenue of the state, redistributed the lands, ensuring royalty at local leadership levels, replaced the corrupted provincial officers with skilled officers, ensuring effective administration of the state and less chance of conspiracy against the Ayyubids. Salahuddin showed everyone that when it comes to being a sultan, he had his own way of doing things. Syria under Nur-ad-Din and Egypt under Salahuddin provided a perfect opportunity to attack the Crusader state kingdom of Jerusalem from 2 different sides. A plan was drawn out. Both Nur-ad-Din and Salahuddin started marching from their own capitals. But halfway to the battleground, Salahuddin returned to Cairo. Nur-ad-Din found himself alone on the battlefield. He continued on with the assault, but ultimately the campaign was not successful. Until today, we do not know for sure why Salahuddin turned back. He wrote to Nur-ad-Din about the possibility of a rebellion in Cairo in his absence, which many scholars argue was not a good enough reason. But what we know for sure is that this event caused a divide in the trust between Nur-ad-Din and Salahuddin, and over time, this divide would only grow bigger. Although disappointed, Nur-ad-Din was content with Salahuddin for the time being. He was still receiving the tribute from Egypt. However, Salahuddin's not showing up initiated a lot of rumors and conspiracy theories in the Zengid court. In general, it was seen by the Zengid emirs as Salahuddin's defiance of Nur-ad-Din's command. In the meantime, Salahuddin was busy in Egypt. The steps he initially took after coming to power started bearing fruits. His army fought skirmishes in the southern and western boundaries of Egypt, launched a campaign against Yemen, and established a strong naval presence along the Red Sea coasts, thereby extending Salahuddin's control to Sudan, Mecca, Medina, and Yemen. Both his treasury and his political influence were enriched by these missions. Salahuddin won the heart and trust of the Egyptians, and people were ready to support his cause. But the more Salahuddin grew in power, the more mistrust and friction occurred between the Ayyubids and the Zengids. Eventually, the Zengid emirs were able to convince Nur-ad-Din that his once deputy had now become too powerful and needed to be removed. In 1174, Nur-ad-Din started preparing his army to invade Egypt, and Salahuddin began preparations to defend it. But during the preparation, Nur ad-Din suddenly fell ill and passed away after only a few days. Nur ad-Din's successor was his son, Saleh, only 11 years old. The news of Nur ad-Din's death reached Salahuddin. Undoubtedly, the death of his childhood hero and mentor had a massive impact on his state of mind. Although they were not on friendly terms at the time of his death, Salahuddin always had a great respect for Nur ad-Din for his effort to unite the Muslims of Syria against the Crusaders. Yet Salahuddin was relieved to some extent, knowing that the civil war between Syria and Egypt would now be avoided. That night, Salahuddin went to the balcony of his quarters. As he looked towards the horizon beyond the vast expanse of his capital city, all the mixed feelings and thoughts regarding Nur ad-Din's death unfolded in his mind. Not only did this impact his personal feelings, the news had also major political implications. Nur ad-Din's death changed the entire geopolitical dynamic of the region. Surely the young son of Nur ad-Din wouldn't be able to practice the same power his father did. The power vacuum would create infighting among the Zengids. What actions should Salahuddin take now? To drive the Crusaders out of the Holy Lands, the existence of a strong Syria is essential. Without strong fronts in both Egypt and Syria, the ultimate victory against the Crusaders cannot be guaranteed. And without Nur ad-Din, Syria does not have that strength any longer. Should Salahuddin launch a campaign against the Crusaders on his own? Perhaps, but if Syria fell into the wrong hands, then the Crusaders could form a new alliance and outmatch Salahuddin's force. Should he then annex Syria first to prevent that? He could, but the values and Islamic teachings that he grew up with prevented him from doing so. He can't wage war against the family of his benefactor without any provocation. That would be hypocrisy for him, making him unsuitable to lead the armies in the Holy Lands according to his own standards of belief. Certainly, Salahuddin was an ambitious man, but his ambition was not more important to him than his principles. He knew in his heart that if he wished to be successful in freeing the Holy Lands from the Crusaders, he had to do it in an honorable way. No political backstabbing and betrayal should be allowed to tarnish his lifelong goal. As the dawn broke and the call for prayer was announced from the minarets of the Grand Mosque of Cairo, Salahuddin could finally make up his mind. He decided to wait and not get involved in the political turmoil in Syria for the time being. His lifelong mission for the Holy Lands was put on pause. A few days later, a messenger reached Damascus with a letter from Salahuddin to As-Saleh. The Sultan of Egypt had promised full support to the young prince and would always come to his aid whenever it was needed. As Salahuddin's letter reached Damascus, another message reached Salahuddin's court in Cairo. Egypt was under attack. A naval fleet of Crusaders and Sicilians laid siege on Alexandria, one of the most important cities in Egypt. The attackers had almost 200 warships, 40 transport ships, and more than 1,000 knights. It was a formidable assault. But this time, Salahuddin was much more prepared than on previous occasions. Soldiers and supplies were quickly sent to Alexandria to reinforce the defenders. The initial blow was heavy on the Muslims. All the warships and commercial vessels of the Muslims at the port of Alexandria were destroyed by the Sicilian invaders. But as the reinforcements reached the city, the defenders' morale was boosted. On the second day of the battle, when the invaders brought their siege towers near the wall of Alexandria, the Muslim defenders burst out of the gates in a surprise attack and did their best to hit the enemy's morale. They burnt down the siege towers, ravaged the enemy camps, and took away large amounts of weaponry and treasure. This was a serious blow to the invaders. As the siege dragged on for days, the invaders started to lose strength. They needed reinforcement, but the promised reinforcements never arrived from the Crusader states. That was because King Amalric died suddenly of dysentery in Jerusalem. His kingdom was passed on to his 13-year-old son, Baldwin IV, who was suffering from leprosy. This sudden death of Amalric prevented the Crusaders from sending the promised supplies to the battlefield. Ever the diplomat, Salahuddin quickly initiated a truce between him and the new Crusader king, leaving the Sicilians alone to fight in the battle. Simultaneously, Salahuddin started marching towards Alexandria with a huge army. The Sicilians had to accept the defeat. What could have been the biggest threat to Salahuddin's reign actually brought yet another victory through his military and diplomatic prowess. But all the news was not good. Back in Syria, the young prince As-Saleh became a pawn in the fighting among top Zengid leaders. The prince was in Aleppo, and the emir of Aleppo, Gumushtigin, wanted to use his guardianship over the prince to establish his own political influence in Syria and kill the other emirs in the region, starting with Damascus. A political rival of the emir of Aleppo was Saif al-Din, the emir of Mosul, but he refused to come to the aid of Damascus when requested. So seeing no other way, the emir of Damascus had to ask support from Salahuddin. This request gave Salahuddin the legitimacy to get involved in the power struggle in Syria. But Salahuddin had to act quickly. There was no time to assemble a large army and spend several weeks marching towards Syria. He took 700 of his best horsemen and rushed towards Damascus. To save time, he even went through Crusader territories, Karak and Shubak. Although a very risky maneuver, it proved fruitful. Salahuddin traveled so quickly through the enemy territory that the Crusaders could not do anything about it. In the end, Salahuddin reached Damascus even before Gumushtigin's army started marching on the city. This was a brilliant move by Salahuddin, as Damascus now came under his control without any serious resistance. It saved plenty of time, resources, and bloodshed. The people of Damascus welcomed Salahuddin with open arms as their protector. After establishing his base in Damascus over the next few days and gathering more local force, Salahuddin quickly moved towards Aleppo, laid siege on the city, and demanded the guardianship of the Prince As-Saleh. One dark night during the siege of Aleppo, while Salahuddin was discussing plans with his emirs in a private tent, someone rushed into the tent from the darkness. He was dressed in black and had a bare knife at his hand. He jumped onto Salahuddin in an attempt to stab him with the knife. This was Salahuddin's first encounter with the secret cult called the Assassins. So far, we have seen Salahuddin rise in power and win one victory after another. As we further explore the events of his life, we'll see a new chapter unfold, a chapter full of struggles, stalemates, and challenges, a period in which Salahuddin spends most of his time and effort fighting his fellow Muslims rather than the Crusaders.